The storm had been building all day, stacking dark banks of cloud across the white mountains until the ridgeline disappeared. By late afternoon, the wind came down like a freight train, hammering the rusted steel siding of the old workshop. Jack Harrington had heard 100 storms in his years on this mountain, but the sound of a nor'easter in full fury was something else entirely. An enemy he could neither see nor fight, only endure. Inside, the air smelled of cold steel and oil. The workshop was both prison and sanctuary. Walls of corrugated iron, a potbelly stove with its faint orange glow, and hulking shapes of unfinished sculptures scattered like frozen sentinels across the floor. Each twisted rebar limb, each scarred plate of metal, was a piece of Jack's history forged in silence. He lived by a rhythm as rigid as the beams that held the roofwork. Eat, sleep, repeat. New television, new radio, new visitors. At 58, he had stripped life down to iron and fire. He sat on a low stool near the stove, boots planted firmly on the concrete, a mug of black coffee between his scarred hands. Outside, the world shrieked. The roof groaned under the weight of snow. The wind wormed through every crack, hissing like artillery rounds overhead. Jack had built this fortress to withstand both storm and memory, and for years it had done exactly that. Then, through the howling, came a different sound. At first, he thought it was imagination, the brain pulling tricks after too many sleepless nights. He tilted his head, listening. It came again, faint and uneven. Not wind, not timber splitting. A whimper. Thin, desperate, so fragile that the storm nearly devoured it whole. Jack froze, mug halfway to his lips. His gut clenched. Instinct screamed to ignore it. Storms killed the curious. He'd seen too many good men vanish by stepping out of cover when they should have stayed put. He had everything he needed inside these walls. Stacked wood, lined up rations, water, a generator fueled and ready. Self-preservation told him the only sane move was to let the sound fade. But beneath that voice of caution rose another, older voice. It came from 30 years back, from sand and smoke and dust. A drill instructor's bark burned into his bones. You do not leave anyone behind, ever. He set the mug down with a hard clink. His heart beat faster, heavy as a hammer striking steel. Jack pulled on his insulated coveralls, parka, wool mask, laced his boots tight. From the wall charger he took the heavy flashlight, tested its beam. The circle of light cut a pale tunnel through dust motes in the air. He checked the stove one last time, banking the fire to a low, steady burn. Every motion was precise, practiced, like gearing up for patrol in hostile territory. At the side door, he unbarred the heavy iron brace. The wind howled against the steel, eager to rush inside. Jack braced his shoulder, twisted the handle, and shoved. The storm hit him like a wall of fists. Snow and ice-laced wind blasted the breath from his lungs. The beam of the flashlight flared useless against a world of white, as if he had aimed it into milk. He gritted his teeth and pulled the door shut behind him. The fortress was sealed again, but he was outside now, in the maelstrom. He moved with care, one gloved hand sliding along the freezing siding of the workshop, the other sweeping the flashlight. 5 feet visibility, no more. The wind clawed at him, shoved him sideways, tried to spin him around. He forced his boots forward, step by step. There the whimper again. North side. He rounded the corner, lost the wall, counted his paces into the open. 20 steps, 30, 40. Just as despair began to creep in, the beam caught a dark line in the snow-rusted barbed wire fence, half buried by drifts. At the base of one post lay a heap of fur and ice. Jack stumbled closer, fell to his knees. A German shepherd, tangled in the bottom strand. Its coat was dusted white, its body curled tight against the cold. A long tear along its thigh oozed frozen blood. For a breathless second, he thought it was already gone. Then 2 eyes blinked up at him, dark, intelligent, filled with pain and something else. Refusal to surrender. Easy now, Jack muttered, his words whipped away by the gale. He lowered the flashlight, set it upright in the snow. With gloved fingers, he worked the twisted barbs free, every tug earning a pained whine that cut through the roar. He shielded the animal with his body, taking the brunt of the wind. Finally, the last barb released. The dog tried to stand but collapsed, too weak. Jack looked at the storm, then at the animal. It would never make it back on its own. The choice was no choice at all. He stripped off his parka despite the slicing cold, wrapped it tight around the shivering body. Then, with a grunt, he slid his arms underneath and lifted. The dog was heavier than he expected, solid muscle beneath the fur, limp now with exhaustion. Each step back was war. Snow up to his thighs, wind hammering, arms burning with strain. His tracks vanished behind him as fast as he made them. At last, the workshop loomed out of the white. He fumbled at the handle, shoved the door open with his shoulder, stumbled inside. The sudden silence was shocking. The door clanged shut, sealing out the storm. He staggered to the stove and lowered the bundle onto a canvas tarp spread on the floor. The dog lay still, eyes half closed, breath shallow. Jack knelt, unwrapping the parka. Wet fur steamed in the warmth. The smell of blood and cold animal filled the room. The dog's gaze flicked between Jack and the towering shapes of metal sculptures around the shop alien sentinels in firelight. A low growl trembled from its chest. Jack backed up slowly, palms open. His pulse still thundered from the rescue, but another feeling crept in underneath, unease. For years, nothing alive had shared this space with him. This was his fortress, his sanctuary, his silence, and now here was a heartbeat not his own. The storm raged outside, but the greater storm had already breached the walls, one he had let in with his own hands. Jack stood over the animal, unsure if he had just saved its life or invited chaos back into his. Then the dog's eyes fixed on him, sharp despite the pain, as if measuring him, and Jack realized whatever battle he thought he had ended years ago had just begun again. The wind howled through the seams of the workshop, rattling the siding like a drum, but inside the storm had a rival. The low, guttural growl that rose from the bundle of fur on the canvas tarp. Jack crouched a few feet away, his parka half draped over the animal, steam lifting off its body in the heat of the stove. The German shepherd's eyes, dark as midnight and sharp despite the wound, tracked his every movement. It was not gratitude in those eyes, not yet. It was calculation, instinct, pain. Jack kept his hands open, palms out, as if approaching a fellow soldier wired to snap. He had patched up men in worse shape than this, tourniquets under fire, morphine shots in burning sand, but never with a patient who might lunge for his throat. "Easy," he said softly, voice low and even, the way he once spoke to young Marines shaking in their first firefight. "Nobody's gonna hurt you now." The growl rumbled deeper, but the dog didn't lunge. Its chest rose and fell, shallow breaths rasping. The torn thigh seeped sluggishly through matted fur. Jack knew infection could kill faster than cold. Leaving it untreated was no option. He scanned the shop, then moved to the old military footlocker shoved against the wall. The lock clicked open to reveal supplies he had carried through 2 deployments. Antiseptic packets, gauze, tape, bandages still sealed in yellowing plastic. His hands, usually steady with steel and welding torch, trembled only once before he forced control back. When he turned again, the dog's eyes were still on him, unblinking. Jack knelt slowly, keeping himself low, and laid the kit beside him. The growl rose at his approach, teeth bared in a flash of white. "I know," Jack muttered, "hurts like hell. But this has to be done." He reached out, not sudden, but deliberate, steady as a surgeon. His gloved fingertips brushed the fur near the wound. The shepherd flinched, a sharp whine breaking free, but it did not snap. That was enough. Jack set to work, wiping away blood, cleaning dirt, his motions economical. The smell of antiseptic cut through the heavy air. The dog trembled beneath his touch, a muscle twitching, a soft whimper escaping. Jack kept talking, nonsense words, just sound to steady them both. "That's it. Hold still. Almost there." He wrapped the leg with gauze, snug but not too tight, then sealed the ends with tape. By the time he leaned back, sweat lined his temples, though the workshop was cold. The dog's breathing slowed. Its eyes, wary, followed his retreat as he eased backward, giving space again. Jack rose and poured fresh water into a ceramic bowl, set it near but not too close. From his shelf, he opened a can of beef stew, spooned the chunks onto a dented tin plate. He placed it on the floor, then did the hardest thing of all, turned his back. He sat at the workbench, tools before him, pretending to busy himself with the grinder. He forced his eyes away, though every nerve strained toward the quiet behind him. For long minutes there was nothing but the fire's crackle and the muted storm outside. Then, the sound. A tongue lapping water. Jack's jaw unclenched. Moments later, the scrape of teeth on metal. He allowed himself a single glance over his shoulder. The plate was empty. The shepherd lay down again, eyes half closed, but still fixed on him. Progress. Jack exhaled slowly. The kind of breath that felt like setting down a pack after a long march. He rubbed a hand over his face, rough with stubble. It had been years since anything alive shared this space. Now the air carried the scent of wet fur, blood, antiseptic. It unsettled him, but underneath that discomfort was something else he refused to name. Hours passed. The dog slept in bursts, twitching legs betraying dreams. Jack worked at his bench, welding sparks bouncing against steel. Yet he found himself glancing often, as if expecting the animal to vanish when he looked away. When it stirred with a whimper, He caught himself whispering reassurance before even thinking. Later, he dragged an old shipping pallet from the scrap pile, cut and sanded the boards. He welded 4 steel tubes for legs, attached the platform, and set an improvised bed by the stove. It was crude, but raised off the cold floor. He laid an old wool blanket across it. Then he stepped back, leaving it in view of the tarp. He didn't need to say what it was. The shepherd, awake now, lifted its head, ears twitching. Jack turned away, pretending indifference. Minutes later, he heard claws click softly on concrete. He didn't move, didn't even turn, until a weight shifted the blanket. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. Ghost, curled on the bed, bandaged legs stretched out, eyes half-lidded, but no longer burning with suspicion. Jack allowed the faintest smile. That night, he tried to sleep on his cot in the corner, but dreams found him quick. A desert street, dust thick in the air, the thunder of mortars, faces blurred, voices calling. He jerked awake, sweat cold, chest tight. His hand dangled off the cot, trembling. A wet nose pressed against it. He flinched. Ghost stood beside the bed, eyes reflecting the stove's glow, a low whine vibrating in his throat. The dog nudged his hand again, insistent. Jack's fingers curled into the thick fur, almost on instinct. The warmth and rhythm of the animal's breathing anchored him, pulling him out of the sandstorm of memory. His pulse slowed. For the first time in years, the panic receded before it devoured him whole. Jack lay back, hands still resting on Ghost's neck. He stared into the dim ceiling beams, hardly believing it. The fortress had been breached. But maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost the war inside after all. When dawn came, pale light filtering through frosted windows, the storm outside had eased to a whisper. Jack rose stiffly, bones aching, and went through the ritual of making coffee in the old percolator. As it bubbled, he glanced at the bed near the stove. Ghost lifted his head, ears pricking. His tail gave a faint, uncertain thump against the blanket. Jack froze at the sound. It was the smallest of gestures, yet it struck like a hammer. A sign of trust. A sign of something beginning. He poured coffee into his mug, staring into the steam. "You and me, huh?" he muttered. The dog watched him silently, dark eyes unwavering. Jack looked away, unsettled by how much it felt like an answer. The day passed with a rhythm neither had known before. Jack worked, Ghost dozed, and limped cautiously around the perimeter of the workshop, sniffing at sculptures as if evaluating sentinels from another world. Each clang of hammer, each hiss of welding torch, the shepherd absorbed without flinch, almost as if he'd been here before, in noise and fire. As night fell, Jack set another log on the fire, poured water, and checked the bandage. The dog allowed it without growl this time, though a low whimper broke loose. Jack's voice steadied, softer than he knew it could be. "You'll heal. We both will." He turned away, but as he reached for the kettle, a sudden sound cut through the room. Not from outside, not from the storm, from Ghost. A short, sharp bark alert, decisive, not fearful. Jack's shoulders tightened. He looked at the dog, ears rigid, eyes fixed on the far door. Something in its posture was unmistakable. Not just an animal's curiosity, but a soldier's vigilance. Jack set the kettle down slowly, every instinct flaring awake. He followed the dog's gaze toward the door, where shadows stretched long in the flickering light. And in that silence, Jack understood. Ghost wasn't just a stray. He was trained, experienced, and whatever history he carried had just stepped into Jack's fortress with him. The question hit like a chill. What kind of soldier had he brought home? The storm broke 2 days later, leaving behind a world carved in silence. Snow lay in deep sheets across the white mountains, draped over trees and rocks, until the forest looked like a frozen ocean. In Ashford below, roads were still buried, the town a scatter of faint lights under white hills. From the high ridge where Jack's workshop stood, the storm might as well have cut him off from the rest of America. And for most of his life, that was exactly what he wanted. But this morning felt different. Jack opened the heavy steel door to a rush of clean, knife-edged air. Sunlight blazed off the snow so bright it forced him to squint. Behind him, the shepherd limped forward cautiously, one paw lifted, tail low. For the first time, Ghost stepped outside the fortress. His nose worked furiously, ears twitching at the thousand scents layered in the frozen stillness. Jack sipped from his battered thermos, watching. He didn't speak, words still came hard, but the corners of his mouth twitched. Ghost stood silhouetted against the endless white, bandaged leg, stiff, but posture proud, as if reporting for duty. Inside the workshop, routines shifted. Meals were no longer silent. Jack found himself sliding scraps across the plate without thinking, an extra strip of bacon, the crust of bread, pieces of beef stew. Ghost accepted them without greed, chewing slow, eyes never leaving Jack's face. There was no begging, no whining, only the steady presence of a soldier taking rations beside another. At night, the fortress changed even more. Sleep had long been Jack's enemy. Every night, the same ambush, a dust-choked street, radio chatter cut with screams, the sickening thunder of incoming. He would bolt awake, soaked in sweat, the darkness crushing down. For years, he walked the floor until dawn, hand pressed to cold steel sculptures, trying to calm his pulse. Now there was another presence. The first time, he woke to the dream, snapping its jaws shut around him, his heart hammering, throat dry, eyes wide. But before panic could swallow him whole, a sound came from the floor. The scrape of claws, a low whine, then warmth against his dangling hand, insistent. A wet nose, a heavy head pressing down, grounding him. He lay still, fingers sinking into thick fur, his breath catching on the edge of a sob he refused to release. Slowly, the memory dissolved, not into silence, but into the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing. Jack slept again, deeply, dreamless. By the third night, Ghost no longer waited for panic. He climbed onto the cot without invitation, curled against Jack's side, as if he had always belonged there. Jack told himself he hated it, that it broke every rule of order he lived by, that he didn't need a guard dog, a companion, a heartbeat beside his. He told himself this even as his hand rested in fur each night, even as the fortress walls inside him thinned. During the day, Ghost revealed more. His ears pricked at sounds Jack hadn't noticed: the distant crack of a tree under snow, the faint groan of ice on the roof. He patrolled the edges of the workshop with deliberate precision, nose sweeping corners, posture alert. Sometimes, in moments that froze Jack's breath, Ghost sat rigid, facing the door, body coiled like a soldier on watch. The realization crept in, slow, undeniable. This was no stray. He had been trained. Somewhere, someone had shaped him for work. Maybe military, maybe police. The faded tattoo Jack had spotted inside the ear told its own story, letters and numbers, blurred with age. A mark Jack recognized. He found himself talking more, almost against his will. Words leaked out like sparks from a weld. At first, practical things: time for more wood, sit still, good boy. Then, longer strings. You know, this piece here, he'd gesture at a twisted tower of gears, it fought me. Steel doesn't always yield easy. Like Sergeant Harper back in Fallujah. Tough bastard. Harder than any rebar I ever bent. The name hung in the air. Jack flinched, waiting for the room to crush him, for the ghosts to pile on. But Ghost only tilted his head, ears forward, eyes fixed. Listening, Jack swallowed, and for the first time in a decade, he let the memory stand without drowning it. It became a ritual. As sparks showered from the grinder, Jack talked. Stories of patrols, of bridges built under fire, of nights staring at empty horizons. Ghost never interrupted, never judged. He only listened, his silence anchoring Jack's voice, pulling up truths he hadn't dared speak aloud since the uniform came off. One afternoon, Jack found himself outside again, shovel in hand, clearing the buried path to the wood stack. Ghost padded beside him, still favoring the bandaged leg but stubbornly keeping pace. They reached the edge of the property, where the old barbed wire fence stood bent under snow. Jack paused, leaning on the shovel. Memories pressed in the moment he had found Ghost tangled here, nearly gone. He glanced down at the dog now, tail wagging faintly, eyes alert. The difference between then and now was staggering. "You're like me," Jack muttered, surprising himself with the raw edge in his voice. "They used you till you broke, then tossed you aside." Ghost looked up at him, steady, as if confirming. Jack's throat tightened. He turned away, drove the shovel into the snow with unnecessary force, angry at his own words. That night, sleep was deeper than ever. No ambush, no mortars, only the steady heat of the stove and Ghost's breathing at his side. For the first time in years, Jack wondered if survival could mean more than endurance. By the end of the week, a new pattern emerged: the patrol. Every afternoon, when the sun hit its highest point, Jack and Ghost set out. They walked the perimeter of the workshop, then the ridge beyond, footprints cutting through drifts. For Ghost, each step was an investigation, nose buried in scents, ears twitching. For Jack, each step was a rediscovery. The forest wasn't just a buffer zone anymore. It was a landscape alive, shared. One afternoon, the sky was knife blue, the snow crusted hard with ice that crunched under boots. They climbed a ridge overlooking the valley. From here, Ashford looked small, a scattering of rooftops and the faint plume of chimney smoke. Ghost trotted a few feet ahead, tail high, moving freer now on the healed leg. Jack drew a long breath, chest filling with cold air. For the first time, the sight of the town didn't choke him with suspicion. Instead, it stirred something quieter. Belonging, maybe, if he dared to name it. He almost turned back then, satisfied, when Ghost stopped. The dog's body stiffened, every muscle tense. His ears snapped forward, nose twitching. A low whine built in his throat, sharp, urgent. Jack frowned. "What is it, boy?" Ghost barked once, sharp and commanding, the sound ricocheting off the ridge. Then he looked back at Jack, eyes burning, before turning his head toward the steep ravine to their right. The slope dropped away into a tangle of bare trees and ice-coated rock. Jack saw nothing but shadows and snow, but Ghost's posture was unrelenting, rigid, focused, tail stiff as a rod. Jack's pulse quickened. He knew that stance. It was a soldier's signal. Something's down there. He stepped closer to the edge, boots crunching. The cold wind sliced his face. For a long moment, there was nothing, only silence. Then faint, carried on the still air a cry. Human, weak, hoarse, but real. Jack's stomach dropped. Ghost barked again, urgent, insistent, eyes locked on him as if to say, "Move." Jack stared down into the ravine, heart pounding, the old voice in his head whispering again, "You do not leave anyone behind." And he realized with a jolt that the fortress was no longer just his. The world outside was calling, through the throat of a dog who refused to let him ignore it. What waited down there in the shadows? The sound was faint, almost devoured by the cold silence, but once heard it could not be mistaken. A human cry, thin, raw, shredded by fear. Jack froze at the edge of the ridge, boots buried in crusted snow, every muscle locking tight. For years he had taught himself to turn away from the world's noise, to build walls of steel against any plea he couldn't answer. But Ghost wasn't turning. The shepherd's ears were forward, his whole body leaning toward the ravine, eyes burning with urgency. "Damn it," Jack muttered under his breath, the words crystallizing white in the air. The old voice in his head roared alive. "You do not leave anyone behind." It was the same code that had dragged him out into the storm to find a bleeding, broken dog. Now, it was summoning him again. Only this time, the cry came from human lungs. He slung his pack from his shoulder, checked the flashlight, and started down the slope. Ghost darted ahead, nimble despite the lingering limp. The descent was brutal ice-slick rocks hidden under snow, tree trunks angled like spears. Jack gripped branches for balance, boots sliding, heart thudding with each step. Ghost moved with a soldier's instinct, pausing, glancing back, then surging forward again toward the sound. Halfway down, Jack heard it clearer. "Help, please." The voice cracked, fading, but it was real. They found him at the bottom, slumped against a ledge of rock. A young man, barely in his 20s, dressed for a stroll in the park rather than a trek in winter mountains. Jeans soaked through, sneakers stiff with ice, a thin jacket torn at the shoulder. His skin was chalk white, lips blue, eyes glassy with shock. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the bone bulging beneath fabric. Jack dropped to a crouch, training flooding back in a rush of cold clarity. "Don't move," he said, voice firm, controlled. "Name?" The kid's teeth chattered. "B. Ben." "All right, Ben, stay with me." Jack's hands moved fast, checking airway, pulse, pupils, hypothermia, compound fracture. Not fatal yet, but close. Ghost stood a few feet away, rigid, scanning the tree line. His ears flicked, nose testing the air. Jack didn't miss it. The dog wasn't just watching, he was guarding. "Good boy," Jack murmured, then tore off his own parka and wrapped it around Ben's shivering torso. The cold bit into Jack's arms instantly, but he ignored it. He snapped branches from a fallen birch, measured by eye, then lashed them to Ben's broken leg with strips of his flannel shirt. The boy cried out, sharp and ragged. But Jack didn't stop. He worked with the speed of a man who had done this on desert floors with mortar fire screaming overhead. When the splint was tight, Jack dug into Ben's pocket for his phone. By some miracle, a single bar of signal glowed. He thumbed 911, voice crisp as he gave coordinates, condition, access route, old habits, short, exact, professional. "They're on their way," he told Ben, forcing calm into his tone. "But you have to stay awake until then. Talk to me." Ben's eyelids drooped, heavy as stone. Jack slapped his cheek lightly. "Eyes open, kid. Where you from?" "Boston," the boy whispered. "College?" A faint nod. "UVM, hiking, trail." His voice cracked. "You picked the wrong week for it," Jack said dryly, trying to pin the kid to consciousness with a thread of humor. "But you'll live to regret it." For an hour, Jack kept him talking. Family, school, anything. Ghost never left his post, moving a slow perimeter, every sense alive. The shepherd would glance back, catch Jack's eye, then resume his watch. It felt less like a rescue than a three-man patrol in hostile country, each with their role, each depending on the others. The whine of engines finally cut through the stillness. Flashing red lights bled across the snow from above. Two paramedics in heavy jackets appeared, lowering a stretcher. Their chief, broad-shouldered with a thick gray mustache, descended last. He took in the scene at a glance. Splinted leg, stabilized vitals, hypothermia delayed by the parka cocoon. His eyes flicked to Jack, surprise and recognition sparking. "You did damn good," the chief said, voice low but sincere. Jack said nothing. He stepped back, letting them lift Ben onto the stretcher. Ghost moved with him, silent shadow, ears never leaving the rescuers until Jack gave a short nod. As they began the grueling climb back up, the chief lingered a moment. He looked at Jack, then at Ghost, then back. "You saved him. Maybe his leg. Maybe his life." Jack's jaw tightened. Praise felt heavier than silence. He gave a curt nod, turned away. The climb back to the ridge was long, slow. Jack and Ghost followed at a distance, keeping out of sight once the rescuers reached the waiting ambulance. The siren wailed, fading down the valley road. Snow settled again. The mountains swallowed the sound. Jack stood at the edge of the ridge, breath clouding in the cold. Ghost pressed close against his leg, warm, steady. Together they watched the taillights vanish into the white. For a moment, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with something else. The echo of purpose, the burn of memory, the reminder that he was still capable of saving. That night, back in the workshop, the air felt different. Jack worked in silence, but his thoughts wouldn't settle. He caught himself staring at Ghost, sprawled on the bed by the stove. The tattoo inside the ear, the soldier's posture, the trained discipline it gnawed at him now harder than ever. This wasn't coincidence. Ghost stirred, ears twitching. He let out a low, sharp woof alert, not fearful. Jack stilled. Then he heard it too. The crunch of tires on gravel, slow, deliberate, climbing the mountain road. Jack set his welding torch aside, hand automatically finding the crowbar near his bench. Ghost was already on his feet, body coiled, gaze fixed on the door. The sound drew closer. Not a lost tourist, not a hiker, a vehicle coming all the way to his fortress. Headlights cut through the high windows, washing the steel walls in stark white. A clean red pickup rolled to a stop outside. The official seal of Maple Creek Fire and Rescue painted on the door. Jack's grip tightened on the crowbar. Ghost growled low, steady. The driver's door opened. A man climbed out, the same chief from the ravine. He shut the door, stood still, hands loose at his sides, gaze steady on the workshop. Then he took a slow step forward. Ghost's growl deepened. Jack's pulse hammered, not from fear, but from the shock of intrusion. His fortress breached again. The chief stopped a few yards away, breath visible in the night. He didn't call out yet. He only looked at the door, as if he knew Jack stood behind it, watching. What did this man want? Thanks? A reckoning? Or something Jack had no idea how to give? Ghost pressed closer, tail stiff, body trembling with focus. Jack laid a hand on his neck, both of them staring out at the figure waiting in the snow. And for the first time in years, Jack wondered if the world was finally climbing the mountain for him. The headlights bled across the corrugated steel walls, cutting the workshop in two with white glare. Jack stood rigid behind the door, crowbar gripped tight in his fist. Ghost pressed against his leg. The shepherd's growl was a low vibration, steady as a motor, ears pinned forward. Outside, the man waited. The fire chief from the ravine, Tom Miller. His breath billowed in white puffs, his boots crunching softly in the snow as he took another step closer. There was no weapon in his hands, no aggression in his stance, but his presence alone was enough to churn Jack's stomach. For 2 decades, the world had left him alone on this mountain. Tonight, it had climbed to his door. Jack exhaled hard, jaw clenched. "Stay," he murmured, voice low, pressing a hand to Ghost's shoulder. The dog froze, muscles trembling, but obeyed. He slid the heavy bar free, cracked the door open just enough for the cold to knife in. His voice came out like steel. "You've got 5 minutes." Miller's eyes flickered in the dim light, steady and calm. He inclined his head, respectful but unshaken. "Fair enough." Jack stepped back, leaving the door ajar. Ghost remained planted at his heel, posture stiff, eyes never leaving the man. Miller entered slowly, boots ringing on concrete. He paused just inside, gaze sweeping the cavernous space. His eyes caught the looming sculptures, the twisted towers of rebar, the shield hammered from a car hood, the jagged sentinels that filled the shadows. He let out a low breath. "So it's true," he murmured. "The Iron Man on the mountain." Jack's face hardened. "Say what you came to say." Miller turned to him fully now, his expression open, almost disarmingly so. "I came to thank you, properly. That boy you pulled out of the ravine, Ben Doctor said, the splint you rigged saved the leg. Kept him from bleeding out too. He's alive because of you." Jack said nothing. Gratitude was a language that scraped raw against his skin. Miller continued. "My paramedics told me you handled the scene like one of them. Calm. Exact. That wasn't luck, that was training." He glanced at Ghost, who stood like a statue, eyes fixed, muscles taut. "And I'd say you weren't the only professional out there." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about him?" The chief shook his head slowly. "Nothing yet, but I know a working dog when I see one. That kind of discipline doesn't come from chasing sticks." The words landed heavy. Jack's chest tightened. He looked at Ghost, who shifted his weight, ears twitching, as if he understood the conversation belonged to him. "I didn't ask for this," Jack said, voice low. "He came to me." "Maybe," Miller said. "Or maybe he was sent to you." Jack's jaw flexed. "Don't start with fate. I've buried enough of that talk." The chief raised his hands, conceding. Silence stretched, broken only by the stove's crackle. Finally, Miller spoke again, his voice steady. "Maple Creek has its Founders Day festival coming. 2 weeks, biggest thing we do all year. We set up booths, parades, the whole town comes out. I'd like you to bring one of your pieces, put it on display." Jack's eyes snapped to him, cold and sharp. "Not a chance." "Listen," Miller said, holding his ground. "People see you as a ghost story. The Iron Man with his hammer in the hills. They don't know you, but after what happened in that ravine, they're talking. Respectfully. They want to know who you are. That boy's family wants to meet you." Jack shook his head hard. "No, I didn't save him for thanks. I did it because it had to be done." Miller studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if he expected this wall. "Fair. But think about it. Your work has power. It deserves to be seen." He glanced again at the towering sculptures, eyes narrowing with something like awe. "Pain forged into steel. People would understand." The words cut deeper than Jack wanted to admit. He tightened his grip on the crowbar, though not in threat, more like an anchor. Miller took a careful step back toward the door. "I'll leave it there, no pressure. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." He reached for the handle, then paused, looking once more at Ghost. The shepherd stood unyielding, silent sentinel at Jack's side. Miller gave the faintest of smiles. "That dog trusts you. That says enough for me." With that, he stepped out into the snow. The crunch of boots receded. The engine roared to life, headlights carving the night, then vanished down the mountain road. The workshop fell silent again. Jack stood motionless, crowbar lowering to his side, Ghost easing at last out of his rigid stance. Jack turned, staring at the sculptures looming in the firelight. "Show them?" he muttered under his breath. "Let them in?" Ghost padded to his bed, circling once before lying down, dark eyes fixed on Jack as if waiting for his answer. The silence pressed heavy, but it was no longer the silence of solitude. It was the silence of a question he couldn't shake. 2 nights later, Jack found himself pacing the length of the workshop, sleep impossible. Miller's words echoed, grinding like gears in his head. "Your work deserves to be seen." He tried to bury it, to lose himself in sparks and welding arcs, but every glance at the sentinels made his chest ache. Ghost followed his every step, tail brushing the floor, head tilted in quiet curiosity. Jack finally stopped, staring at the newest piece he had been shaping since the storm. A figure of chains and jagged plates, trapped yet defiant, a solitary guardian in steel. The Watcher. His throat tightened. Wasn't that what he had been all along? Watching, never joining, never speaking, a sentinel to his own pain? Ghost padded close, pressed his head against Jack's hand. Jack let his fingers rest in the thick fur, exhaling hard. "Maybe you're right," he whispered. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant sheet of blue, sunlight dazzling across the snow. Jack backed the old truck up to the workshop door, chain hoist ready, canvas tarps spread. He worked in silence, preparing the Watcher for its first journey down the mountain. Ghost sat by the door, tail thumping once, steady and certain. Jack wrapped the sculpture, secured the chains, tightened the straps. His breath came heavy, more from nerves than labor. With each pull, each knot, he felt the walls of his fortress shifting. Not crumbling, not yet, but bending. By noon, the Watcher stood loaded in the truck bed, tarps tied down tight. Jack stood with one hand on the tailgate, staring at the weight of his own soul wrapped in canvas. He felt Ghost brush against his leg, steady as always. Jack looked down at him, a flicker of something almost like a smile at his mouth. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what they do with it." He climbed into the truck. The engine coughed, rattled, then caught. Snow crunched under the tires as he began the slow descent into the valley. Ghost leaning against the seat, ears twitching at the wind. Maple Creek waited below, banners strung across Main Street, voices and music carrying faint on the air. Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. His fortress was behind him now. Ahead lay something far more dangerous. The world. What would it see when the canvas came off? Main Street of Maple Creek was alive with color and sound. Banners stretched across lampposts, children darted between booths, clutching caramel apples, and the brass of the local high school band throbbed in uneven rhythm from the gazebo on the green. It was the Founders' Day festival, a yearly anchor for the town, and to most it was nothing more than laughter, food, and a chance to forget winter's bite. But for Jack, inching his rust-riddled pickup into the cordoned street, it was an invasion. The watcher loomed under canvas in the truck bed, strapped down with chains. Every bounce of the road sent a dull metallic groan through the straps, like the sculpture itself resisted being brought here. Jack's jaw clenched. Beside him, Ghost leaned against the seat, ears twitching, eyes scanning the crowd through the open window. The shepherd's presence steadied him, but his chest was tight, as if the steel walls of his fortress had been left miles behind. People noticed instantly. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-laugh. The Iron Man had descended from the mountain. Chief Miller waved him toward the central green, his red uniform jacket bright as a flare. Jack backed the truck into the space by the flagpole. The air smelled of grilled sausages, kettle corn, damp hay. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, whispering. Miller clapped a hand on the tailgate. "Right here's good. We'll set her up." Jack killed the engine, stepped out. The chatter of the crowd fell into a curious hush. He felt the eyes of Maple Creek on his back, prying, measuring. Ghost leapt down beside him, posture alert, as if guarding his flank. With the help of 2 firefighters, they unstrapped the chains. Jack moved like a man performing a ritual. Every knot untied, every strap loosed, felt like prying open his chest. Finally, he gripped the canvas tarp and pulled. The watcher emerged. Forged from rusted chains, dented plates, and jagged angles, it stood over 7 feet tall, both trapped and defiant. Arms pressed against invisible weight, face lifted as if resisting collapse. It was raw, scarred, unyielding. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Children stilled, staring. A woman covered her mouth. One man whispered, "My God." Another, "It looks alive." Jack stood off to the side, shoulders rigid, every nerve screaming to flee. But he stayed. Ghost pressed close, steady anchor against his leg. Miller's voice rose over the murmurs. "This is the work of the man who saved a boy's life in that ravine last week. He lives on the ridge. He makes these out of scrap, paint into steel. I asked him to share one with us." The crowd shifted. Respect glimmered where suspicion once lived. An older woman stepped forward, gray hair pulled tight, eyes wet. She reached out, not touching the steel, but hovering her hand just shy of it. "It feels sad," she said softly, "but strong, like it won't fall." Others gathered, circling the sculpture. A teenager whispered to his father, "It's like it's holding something invisible." A man with soot-blackened hands from the forge murmured, "That's no junkyard heap, that's truth." Jack's throat tightened. He wanted to vanish, but he couldn't look away from them, strangers seeing what he had hidden for decades, not just twisted steel, but him. Ghost's tail thumped once against his leg, as if reminding him to breathe. Hours passed in a blur. People came and went, the festival swelling around them. Jack answered no questions, offered no words. But he watched, silent, as neighbors he had never known stood transfixed by the watcher. He caught fragments, haunting, powerful, like he's one of us after all. And for the first time, the silence inside him didn't feel like exile. It felt like belonging. As twilight bled over the valley, lanterns were lit across the green. Children carried sparklers, laughter echoing into the cold night air. The watcher stood immovable, its shadow stretching long under the lights. Jack lingered at the edge, Ghost at his heel. Chief Miller joined him, holding 2 paper cups of hot cider. He offered one. Jack hesitated, then accepted. The heat seeped into his rough hands. "They respect you now," Miller said quietly. "Not just the man who saved that boy. They see the soldier, the artist, both." Jack stared into the cider. "Respect doesn't last." Miller shrugged. "Maybe, but it's a start." He sipped, eyes narrowing toward the sculpture. "That thing, it doesn't just stand there. It speaks." Jack said nothing. words lodged like stones in his chest. When the crowd thinned, Jack loaded the watcher back onto the truck, chains rattling in the dark. People watched him drive away, their faces not wary now, but thoughtful. The climb back up the mountain was silent. Ghost lay curled on the seat, eyes half closed. Jack's grip on the wheel eased only when the workshop's steel walls loomed from the dark. Inside, he unstrapped the sculpture, leaving it in the truck for the night. He built a fire, poured coffee, sat heavy on the stool by the stove. Ghost stretched out beside him, sighing deep. Jack stared at the flames, thoughts spinning. For years he had welded alone, each sentinel a private scream of memory. Tonight strangers had stood before one and heard it. Maybe Miller was right, maybe there was value left in him, not just steel. Ghost shifted, head resting against Jack's boot. Jack let his hand fall into the thick fur, eyes closing. "We did it," he whispered, almost in disbelief. The fortress didn't feel like a prison tonight, it felt like home. But as the fire sank into embers, a sound cut through the night. Not the wind, not the crack of timber. Tires on gravel, slow, heavy. Jack stiffened, Ghost instantly on his feet, ears sharp. Headlights swept across the windows. Not Miller's red truck, darker, lower, two silhouettes inside. The vehicle idled, engine growling. Then the lights snapped off. Jack's heart pounded. Ghost growled low, steady, the same way he had in the storm the night they first met. Someone had come up the mountain again, but this time they hadn't come with gratitude. The engine idled in the dark, just beyond the workshop. No headlights, no voices, just the low mechanical growl vibrating through the stillness. Jack stood frozen at the side door, coffee mug forgotten on the workbench, hand tightening around the crowbar. Ghost was a taut shadow beside him, hackles raised, lips pulled back to show the glint of teeth. For years, Jack's mountain had been his fortress. Visitors were rare and always obvious. But this was different. Whoever sat in that car had driven up the gravel path in silence, killed the lights, and waited. Predators. Jack's breath fogged in the cold air as he eased the door shut, bolting it quick. The only light came from the stove's orange glow, throwing restless shadows across the metal sentinels looming in the dark. Ghost paced in tight circles, then planted himself at the window slit, nose pressed to the glass, growl rumbling like a warning siren. The car door creaked open. Snow crunched, a voicemail, low, carrying. "He's in there." Jack's chest tightened. Another set of steps followed, slower, heavier. 2 men. He slipped across the floor, every muscle alive with old instinct. No rifle anymore, no sidearm, but the crowbar was heavy, balanced. His boots made no sound on the concrete. Ghost stayed pressed to his side, eyes blazing, waiting for a command. Outside, the men circled. One rattled the main steel door. Another walked the perimeter, boots dragging along the siding. Their shadows slid across frosted windows. "Locked up tight," one muttered. "You sure it's the right place?" A pause. Then the other answered, sharper. "The dog's here," the mark said shepherd, gray coat, military tag in the ear. "This is it." Jack's stomach dropped. His gaze flicked to Ghost, who was staring through the glass, body quivering with rage. The tattoo. They knew. The men had not come for him. They had come for Ghost. Something primal surged up in Jack's chest. Rage, old and unfiltered. The kind that had carried him through firefights. Ghost wasn't just a stray, he was a target. A discarded soldier, someone wanted back. The men tried the side door next. The handle rattled, then a curse. One slammed a boot against it. The steel held, but the echo shuddered through the workshop like a drumbeat. Ghost barked, sharp and furious, lunging at the door. Jack grabbed his collar, holding him back. The voices receded, muffled now. Then silence. Only the hum of the idling engine, then the crunch of boots fading. Jack waited, every nerve straining. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. Finally, the engine revved, gravel spat, and the vehicle rolled back down the mountain road, swallowed by snow and night. Jack let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ghost remained at the door, still trembling with pent-up energy, ears swiveling until the last echo of the tires was gone. Only then did the shepherd turn, pressing his head against Jack's leg with a low whine. Jack sank onto the stool, crowbar clattering against the floor. His hands shook as he dragged them down his face. He thought of Miller's words, maybe he was sent to you, maybe. Or maybe someone had simply lost control of their weapon. But now Jack understood. Ghost wasn't lost. He was being hunted. The workshop no longer felt safe. Its steel walls weren't walls, they were a target, painted bright on the map of men who knew how to find him. Jack poured water into Ghost's bowl with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. The dog lapped, then circled tight before lying down, still watchful. Jack stared at him across the firelight, his chest hollow. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. No answer, only the slow blink of loyal eyes. Sleep was impossible that night. Jack sat at the workbench, welding mask pulled low, grinding sparks into the dark just to drown his thoughts. But his eyes kept straying to the window. The forest loomed outside, black and endless, and somewhere in that black, headlights could flare at any moment. Ghost stayed awake too. Every creak of timber, every groan of wind pulled his head up, ears sharp, eyes trained on the door. A soldier on guard, same as Jack had once been. By dawn, the storm clouds had thinned, revealing a sky pale and brittle with cold. Jack finally slumped onto the cot, exhaustion dragging him under. He dreamed of nothing but silence, broken by a single image. Ghost standing on a battlefield, not beside him, but ahead, staring down enemies Jack couldn't see. He woke with a start, heart racing. Ghost lay at the foot of the cot, head on his paws, eyes open, watching. Jack pushed upright, every bone aching. He poured coffee, bitter and strong, and stood by the window. The mountain looked unchanged, blanketed in snow, but now he saw it differently. Not as sanctuary, as siege ground. Chief Miller's words came back again. They see the soldier, the artist, both. But what would the town see if men came after Ghost? If Maple Creek learned the truth that the dog who saved their boy carried a mark from another war? Jack rubbed a hand over his face. He had never asked to protect anyone again. And yet, here he was, staring down a fight he hadn't chosen. Because he couldn't let go of the one ally who had walked into his fortress and torn its silence open. He set the mug down, knelt by Ghost, and looked into those dark, unwavering eyes. "If they come back," his voice cracked, low and rough. "We don't run, not this time." Ghost's tail thumped once, steady, as if sealing the vow. The rest of the day passed in tense routine. Jack cut wood, shoveled snow, repaired a bent hinge on the bay door. All the while, his ears strained for the sound of tires. None came. But the threat hung heavy in the air, a storm waiting to break. That evening, as the fire crackled and Ghost dozed, Jack sat at his bench, staring at a half-finished piece of steel. He couldn't focus. His mind replayed the men's words over and over. Military tag. This is it. Someone had sent them. Someone who believed Ghost belonged to them. Jack's fists clenched. Ghost wasn't theirs anymore. He wasn't property. He was here, in this fortress, because he had chosen it. Outside, night fell heavy again. Snow drifted from the sky in thin, steady lines. Jack banked the fire, set his tools aside, and turned off the lights. The workshop sank into shadows. Ghost stirred, ears twitching. Jack lay on the cot, one hand resting in the shepherd's fur. The dog exhaled deep, settling. For a moment, it almost felt safe again. Then sound, faint, distant. Not an engine, not boots, something sharper. The crack of a rifle shot, echoing across the mountain. Jack's eyes snapped open. Ghost was already on his feet, rigid, staring toward the trees. Another crack followed, closer this time, ricocheting off the valley walls. Not a hunter, not a warning, a message. Jack rose, heart hammering, hand tightening on the crowbar. He moved to the door. Ghost pressed to his side, both of them staring into the dark. Someone out there wanted Ghost back, and they were done knocking. The crack of the rifle hung in the night air, echoing across the ridge like thunder. Jack stood rigid in the dark, every muscle alive. Ghost pressed against his leg, growl vibrating through the floorboards. Another shot rang out closer, sharper. Snow cascaded from a pine outside, branches splintering. They weren't aiming at him. Not yet. They were sending a message. Jack pulled the side door shut tight, bolted it, then crossed to the workbench. His hands moved automatically, like the drills of his past, shoving supplies into a duffel, filling the thermos with water, checking the gas in the generator. He didn't own a rifle anymore, but he had tools, crowbars, heavy wrenches, sharpened scrap. Steel had always been his weapon. Ghost paced by the door, ears swiveling, teeth bared. The dog wasn't afraid. He was ready. Outside, the voices carried now, faint but distinct. 2 men, maybe 3. Boots crunching on frozen ground, laughter muffled. "Dog's in there. Told you he was alive." Orders said bring him back breathing. Doesn't say nothing about the man. Jack's jaw tightened. Rage flared hot in his chest, but behind it came something colder, sharper clarity. These weren't hunters. They weren't neighbors. They were retrieval. Contractors, maybe. Hired hands for someone who thought Ghost was still theirs. Jack crouched by the stove, dragged open the firebox, tossed in a fresh log. The flames surged, casting long shadows across his metal sentinels. Their jagged shapes loomed taller, like soldiers at attention. Jack straightened, crowbar heavy in his grip. His fortress wasn't just walls tonight, it was a battlefield. The first blow landed against the bay door, a heavy metallic clang that rattled the bolts. Ghost lunged, barking ferociously, his voice a weapon of its own. Another blow followed, then a crowbar screeching against steel. Jack moved to the side door, crouched low, peered through the slit. A figure in dark clothes, ski mask pulled tight, battering at the bay with a sledgehammer. Another shadow moved along the siding, testing windows. "Stay," Jack whispered. Ghost trembled, but froze, eyes burning. The next clang dented the steel panel inward, dust drifting from the rafters. The workshop shuddered with the assault. Jack drew a breath, long and steady. He had been here before. Different country, different enemy, same choice, fight or fold. He wasn't folding, not with Ghost at his side. He killed the lights, plunging the workshop into darkness. Only the fire's glow remained, flickering, restless. The sculptures loomed in half shadow, monstrous, alive. Jack moved silently between them, Ghost stalking at his heel. The panel buckled. A wedge of cold air knifed through the crack. Then the door gave way with a metallic shriek, slamming open. Two men burst inside, one with the sledge, another with a flashlight sweeping the dark. Their beams slashed across steel shapes, twisting them into grotesque shadows. For a heartbeat, they hesitated, disoriented. That was all Jack needed. He swung from the dark, crowbar striking the man with the flashlight square across the forearm. The light clattered to the floor, beam spinning wild. Ghost exploded forward, a blur of gray fur and teeth, slamming into the second man's chest. The sledgehammer dropped with a crash, the man crying out as Ghost dragged him down, teeth sinking into padded sleeve. The workshop erupted in chaos, shouts, snarls, steel crashing. Jack ripped the crowbar free, pivoted, and drove his shoulder into the second man, slamming him against a column of welded gears. The jagged edges tore fabric. A spray of sparks showering from a grinder knocked off the bench. "Call him off!" the man screamed, pinned under Ghost's crushing weight. Jack's voice was ice. Not a chance. The first man scrambled, clutching his arm, retreating toward the door. Ghost whipped his head, growling low, muzzle soaked, eyes blazing. The man bolted, vanishing into the night. The second thrashed, but Ghost held him firm, jaws locked. Jack raised the crowbar, pressing it under the man's chin. "Who sent you?" Jack hissed. The man choked, coughing. "Dogs, not yours. Belongs to them." "Who?" "The unit, Special Projects. Said he went missing. Worth more than—" He cut off with a grunt as Ghost tightened. Jack's stomach clenched. Military. Ghost wasn't just trained. He was built, owned, discarded, and now hunted. Before Jack could press further, another gunshot cracked outside, shattering the high window. Glass rained down, wind knifing in. The man on the floor twisted, kicked, and scrambled free, bolting into the dark. Ghost lunged, but Jack grabbed his collar, yanking him back. Boots thundered outside, more voices, shouting. Not two, not three, more. Jack backed into the center of the workshop, chest heaving. Ghost snarled beside him, teeth bared, ears sharp. The fire spat embers, shadows writhing across the walls. This wasn't a siege anymore. It was an assault. Headlights flared through the high windows too, then 3 vehicles pulling into the yard. Doors slammed, beams sweeping the snow. Dark figures spread, surrounding the fortress. Jack's breath fogged. Ghost barked, savage, furious, the sound echoing like a war drum. Jack tightened his grip on the crowbar. He was one man, with steel and a dog, but he had fought worse odds, in worse places, with less reason, and he had never had a comrade like this one. The first spotlight hit the bay door, flooding the inside with blinding light. A voice boomed through a bullhorn, cold and commanding. "Hand over the animal. Do it now, and you walk away." Ghost barked again, teeth flashing in the firelight. Jack laid a hand on his neck, steady. His eyes burned with something fierce, something alive he thought he had buried long ago. He turned toward the door, voice rising over the fire's crackle, low but unbreakable. "He's not property." Silence answered. Then, the sound of boots moving closer, snow crunching, metal tools striking. They were preparing to breach. Jack's pulse thundered. The fortress was about to become a battlefield. Ghost pressed tight to his leg, tail stiff, body quivering with readiness. Jack looked down into those eyes, loyal, burning, unyielding. The same eyes that had pulled him out of the storm, that had anchored him through nights of ghosts. Jack raised the crowbar, shoulders squaring, breath steadying. The steel walls of his prison had become his shield. He wasn't alone anymore. The bullhorn crackled again, sharper now. Last chance. Jack's voice cut through the dark, raw and certain. Come and take him. The night exploded with movement.